Hey, everybody, and welcome to Key Conversations for Leaders. I'm your host, John Ryan, and today we have a very special guest, Dr. Matthew Hurtienne. Dr. Matt is the Associate Dean of Undergraduate Programs for the School of Business and Director of the Doctorate of Business Administration at Concordia University, Wisconsin. He's also the Director of Morph Advisors Consulting. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Yeah, thank you, John. Thanks for the opportunity to be here and to talk about employee engagement and talk about leadership, two very important topics to me.
Excellent. Looking forward to our discussion. And I wanted to know if we could trace it back a little bit first and talk a little bit about how you first became interested in leadership and business in general.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think we all have our own journeys and pathways that gets to leadership. Some of us may have had negative experiences. Some of us may have had positive experiences. Either way, a lot of us kind of take a look at leadership a little bit different. I had the opportunity, and this seems a little going way back in history, back to probably when I was 12, when I was in 4-H, which a lot of people think it's about animals and farms, and it does have roots there, but I had the opportunity to study 4-H, study leadership in the 4-H programs, and I feel very blessed that I had the opportunity to do that, to meet with executives and business owners and corporate CEOs and government officials during that journey. And that really led me into what is now called like servant leadership and what is called looking at coaching and mentoring skills and how to help people be productive. So my journey of leadership really started when I was 12. And then some of that leadership training actually allowed me to start my own business in entertainment business when I was about 15 years old. And I had the chance and the opportunity to manage and lead employees, work with expenses and incomes and just kind of monitor the budgets in that aspect. And then when I got out of high school and got into more of a professional role, because at that point, the little thing called iPod was coming out and I sold my entertainment business at that point, but really started looking at how successful change was and why was some change not successful and some change was successful. And that really led me in the journey of studying change and studying employee engagement.
So you started your first business when you're 15. You said it was in the entertainment
It
industry.
was,
What
yeah,
is that? Yeah.
it was. So originally started as a disc jockey service, and
Awesome.
started and actually it was tied back to 4-H. But yeah, so it started as a DJ business, and then it morphed into DJ sound entertainment, so music venues, and then also videos for weddings. And then technology evolved, and we saw the technology was evolving. So we kind of got out at the height before the iPods were released, and at that point, people started plugging in iPods for wedding receptions, and so we kind of we made the decision to sell and reinvest.
Oh, awesome. So did you actually sell the business and divest it at that point?
We did, yes, we did. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, but so it sounds like technology, the iPod kind of was a disruptor and kind of changed the business plan, and then you became interested in change and how all that works. What are some of the biggest challenges you think leaders and companies are facing today around change? Technology, which interrupted your business or impacted your business, certainly is an issue. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges companies are facing today?
Well, obviously the easy answer is COVID, but it really goes back before that, and it's something we've talked about before. Is something that's referred to as scenario planning. How do you plan for the unknown, right? How do you make action plans, not knowing exactly what's coming down the pike, and that's something that scenario planning helps you with. Strategic planning kind of takes you from point A to point B. Scenario planning helps with that to say life doesn't go from point A to point B. Disruptions occur, right? COVID occurs, technology occurs, stuff that we would say in the human resource development world would say the external environment is one of the biggest predictors for the need for change. And it could be that technology, it could be a virus, it could be change in a political system. But when we look at change, the biggest thing is trying to plan for the unknowns, but also limit the resistance. So the question kind of came up in a meeting I was at is how did we just recently make such a massive change in the business world? How did we go from trying to figure out how to keep our doors open and now people are wearing masks, and we're not used to that. And essentially, that question comes down to, if people understand the risks and if people understand the need for change, they're more willing to change, right? So you limit that resistance. So the key now is in the business world is how do you make change when you don't always have a pandemic to help make that change or foster that change? How do you educate your employees and your stakeholders to say, we have to take this next step? And if we don't take this next step, this is probably what's going to happen to our organization. So essentially, for my business, when I was 15 and sold it a couple of years after that, we saw that technology was going to be a disruptor, right? So we knew we had to change. And we had a couple choices, and we picked the choice at that point we were going to sell and reinvest. If we would have stayed in the business and kind of put a blind eye to the technology, there would have been a very strong chance that we would have been bankrupt and didn't have any money to reinvest. So it really comes down to foresight, which is a scenario planning, and really comes down to getting your stakeholders to buy into the need for change.
So the strategic level of planning, is that the biggest picture, and then it goes down to scenario planning and then tactical beneath that, or are there other levels in between that in your model and the way you look at it?
Yeah, so the way I look at it is strategic planning helps you on like a 3 to 5 year basis, really looking at where your key metrics want to be, your KPIs, solidifying your mission and vision, which all helps to produce the culture that you want, right? And it helps to get the systems theory in place, people working together to make sure that the company's moving in the right direction. Scenario planning comes in and it's trying to take a look more at a 5 to 10 year plan. So you're not redeveloping KPIs per se in scenario planning. What you're trying to do is to say what could disrupt our organization or what could really help our organization down the road. We talk about the oil crisis in the 1970s. Scenario planning was often used there and used very successful to predict that there was an oil crisis coming. Scenario planning has been used in military tactics for a long time and been successful there. And we see countless other scenarios that have been played out and have been successful. The biggest thing is what you're trying to do is take 2 to 4 different scenarios. And what I like to say is scenarios that have high impact and high probability of occurring, right? So you're spending your time on something that's going to have a major impact to your organization and a major impact or a major probability of it happening. And then you kind of subdivide it down into those actions so that you're spending your time with something that there's a good chance you're going to see. So down south in the Gulf, maybe some of the scenario planning could be around what happens if a hurricane comes through Disney World. How do we respond to that? Or what happens if the tourism industry dies off, and how does something like the resort communities stay active? And that's kind of what you're seeing a little bit with COVID. So when we talk about scenario planning, you probably wouldn't have been able to identify COVID-19 specifically, but there's enough history to show that there's been pandemics before, and there's been major international sicknesses before, and depending on what industry you're in, that could have been something that's bubbled up in the scenario plan. So then you develop action plans to that, so that when something similar happens or when the iPod comes out, now you have a plan in place. So you're not making emotional decisions at a very high stress time. You take that plan off the shelf and you say, okay, we've already developed an action plan to this. And now we know how to respond to this, versus bringing everybody around together saying, how do we handle this in a time of crisis? It's already been solved. Or in higher education, we talk about this a lot, is how do you, if your customer base, or maybe that's even put it into like a restaurant industry, if your customer base grows by 50 customers each night, that's usually a good thing that happens, right? That's usually like revenue. However, it may not be a good thing if you're not prepared for it. So if you see your customer base significantly increasing and you don't have a plan on how to grow with it, that could also cause you to go bankrupt. In higher education, we often talk about if our population of students grow by, let's say, 200, how do we respond to that? Or if it decreases by 10%, how do we respond to that, right? And then having those plans in place. So I call them like sisters and brothers. It's hard to have one without the other.
Sure.
Meaning it's hard to have a strategic plan and not have a scenario plan.
So the scenario planning, please forgive me. I think I had then my model inverse. That actually, so the strategy is going from point A to point B, and then the scenario planning is considering the other factors, technology, environmental, political, all the things you talked about before that can impact our ability to get from point A to point B, and what happens if.
Correct. Correct.
If we're growing our customer base by 50 a night, that seems great, but we have capacity issues, and then all of a sudden we have a line out the door, and what are we going to do about that? Same thing with students that's really interesting. So something like this, tying it back into the vision and mission, and creating buy-in. When you have a big stick like the pandemic and risk of fatality and long-term illness and things like that, people are pretty willing to change. And so this idea of getting everyone on the same page, you can't always count on a huge pandemic to influence that behavior. What are some other tools that leaders have to help create buy-in at an organizational level beyond, creating these type of global catastrophes?
So that's a really great question. As we talk about leadership, as we talk about management, as we talk about principles that you would learn in like an MBA program or a DBA program, I really believe that you need to blend the methods of management and leadership together into one. It's hard. It's like scenario planning and strategic planning. It's kind of hard to have one without the other. If you want to minimize resistance and you want to try to get buy-in into where the company needs to evolve to, it starts years before that planning starts. It really starts with the CEOs, the C-suites and the supervisors building trust with the employees, building that trust and relationship so that when you have to make a rapid change that maybe is not fully understood by the stakeholders, that they have trust that you're being led in the right direction, right? You may not be comfortable with the change, but if you can trust the people that are helping to lead the change and evoke the change, they're more likely to support you. If they don't support you and they don't support the change, even if it's the right change, in theory, change could be disastrous for not only the organization, but the customers and the service base that they're serving.
So start with the relationship, and it has to really be starting now. Like if you haven't already established that, that's important because you can't always plan on when that's going to happen unless you're doing really good scenario planning, in which case you've thought through those particular issues that are there. So building relationship, building trust. What about communication? Is there such a thing as over communication in terms of relationship building within the organization?
Yeah, so trust, for me, trust and communication kind of go hand in hand. So trust is kind of like the umbrella, right? So underneath trust, you would have communication. And in communication, it's got to be authentic communication. Communication where you are developing a sense of understanding of what's occurring. So maybe showing your financial pictures to some extent, showing what's occurring in the marketplace, having townhouses and allowing people to speak and ask questions that you as the leader may not have even thought about, which just helps make your case better. And also looking at taking those critical voices that that has trust of their peers, but aren't going to be the yes people all the time, and getting them in the room and really having some dialogue and really talking through about this is where we are currently, this is where we think we need to head to, this is the implications that we might have, and what are your thoughts? What do you think? Do you think this would be a good fit for our organization? Do you think this is going to be a good fit for the people that buy our services? And what do you think are going to be some of the stumbling blocks? And just by getting everybody on board in that communication plan helps build that trusting relationship.
So embracing the critical voices, the naysayers, the devil's advocates, is that done privately? Is that done publicly, or both?
Both. Sometimes it's one-on-one. I've seen a lot of success as working with some consulting jobs that doing it publicly, like asking for people to come out, publishing minutes, having critical conversations and meetings. And I've seen I've seen the difference between what was transformational change and transactional change, right? Meaning that we're going to get the whole, we're going to, instead of just saying, this is what we're going to do, we're going to take a little bit extra longer. We're going to vet out our ideas, get some ideas that we may not have even thought about as leaders, but also try to get the stakeholders on board with that change so that they support it and they're going to be champions of it themselves.
It seems like there'd be a lot of research that supports greater ownership when you involve people throughout the organization versus just being a top-down thing. Is that true, or is that just my own thinking on the matter?
It's true, and especially now as we start talking a little bit more about the millennial generation and, and a little bit with the Xers. There was a point in time that you wanted to come in, punch the clock, do your job, punch the clock, go home, spend time with your family. Well, now that has shifted where the millennial generation wants to be part of that discussion. Right? They want to have their voices heard. They want to be seen as somebody that can give back to their organization and provide feedback in their own opinions to help make that organization more successful. So I think it really comes down to looking at how the business practices change and largely change because of values and beliefs that your staff brings to you as they're trained in college, as they're trained in university or wherever they come from. You got to figure out what are their wants so that you can try to get to what your needs are as an organization.
I know you do a lot of work with and research around millennials and the different value system and motivational hot buttons and things like that. What are some of the key differences between the millennials and other demographic groups around what it means to be engaged and what they're really looking for in today's work environment?
Yeah, so one of the definition we're kind of working on as a research team right now is looking at the amount in which an employee is willing to invest in the success of an organization. So if you really think back to that is ask yourself the question of how committed are you to the success of the organization you're currently in, or how successful or how committed are you to the success of the organization that you may have left, and why did you leave, right? So when we look at employee engagement, it comes down to a lot of vigor. Like what's their vigor and what's their absorption and what's their dedication, which really means how much time and energy does the employee really want to put into the organization? How much do they want to be absorbed by that? But how dedicated are they? And that becomes a really good question about retention, right? So there's a theory that if an employee is more engaged, the longer they'll stay at your organization. Now, it's pretty impractical nowadays to think millennials and probably Gen Zs will stay more than 5 years. But if the average is around 3 years and we can keep them 5 years, we had a positive incline on that, right? Especially when you look at it, an employee leaving costs us about $20,000 a year, or $20,000 every time an employee leaves. So we have to dive down and figure out what are some of these differences between what we call generational cohorts. So when we talk about years, birth dates, and when you see stuff on media and papers, the years fluctuates. But what really doesn't fluctuate is their life experiences and how those life experiences growing up really shape their beliefs and values. So for me, in my generation, we want to work 60 hours a week. That's like who we are. 50, 60 hours a week, we're working, we go to work, we come home and work and wake up when we work and we try to find time to sleep. And we're giving back to the organization, 100% at work and at home. And that's kind of what drives us. And that's good. That's a sign of engagement. But as we're studying millennials, it's a little bit different. They're willing to put in 50 hours, 45 hours a week. They're really go above it and beyond, but they don't want to do that all the time. They want to do it when they find value in it. That's to say, you're an agricultural business and it's high time, right? It's winter time. You're trying to get products out the door to the shops for the farmers to buy. You understand that you're going to have peaks and valleys. but they also want to have time, like that social life balance, right? They want to make money so that they can go hiking and climbing and have social time. But they also want that idea of community, building that sense of community of going out and helping service projects, maybe even during paid time. But they also really want the sense of acceptance. Back when I started in my professional career, I would hear older generations say, kid, you're 18 years old, you can't talk now. And they didn't know I was running a business, a successful business, and had questions at the time as, do I stay in the market and just run my business? Would that be my professional career? So that comment kind of comes back to say, we need to take the time to figure out who our employees are and give them a voice and have that trust in relationships. With millennials, we hear that one of the largest engagement factors with millennials is who the direct supervisor is and the leadership styles that direct supervisor brings to the table. And that's powerful, especially as we talk about leadership here today.
Is there one management styles that millennials are seeking out more than others?
That's also a good question. As a leader, as a manager, and as a leader, as a supervisor, you have to understand who you're working with. And everybody, even if you try to put everybody into the same buckets, people are still going to bring like their sub ideas and beliefs to the table. But a lot of the discussions kind of go around servant leadership and traits that come along with servant leadership. Millennials want to be mentored. They want to be coached. They want to see where their, what I call a progression plan is taking them. How do you move from level A employment to level B employment? So, how do you make strides in your own career? But they also just want to know that you trust them and you're going to look out for them, which means sometimes a good leader understands that you take the fall for the employee as well. If something goes wrong, like you build that trust by building those relationships and showing them that you're there to support them so that they can have a long, productive career.
One of the characteristics you identified in some of the articles you've written is persistence. Can you talk about the idea of persistence as it relates to engagement and performance, and does that change across the generations?
Well, I think when we look at it, persistence itself in the employment context, it does link back to employee engagement, and this is how it occurs. Employee engagement looks at your willingness to help your organization succeed, and we kind of covered that definition already. Persistence is how well you're going to overcome challenges so that you as an individual can be successful, but relating back to employee engagement, how the organization can be successful. So in the world of HRD, human resource development, we often talk about this. The field of human resource development looks at ways to unleash human expertise at the individual level, the group level or team, and the organizational level. So there's just like 3 levels that come with that. Now, how does that impact persistence? Well, if you have a positive supervisor, somebody that's there coaching you, that's being critical, like that's helping you to learn and grow. It doesn't mean I was giving accolades. It's giving constructive feedback as well on how to improve. If you have that trust and relationship built with your supervisor, if you buy into the mission and vision of the organization, if you trust your CEO in the direction that they're heading, you're more likely to withstand little episodes of turmoil. Organizations are human-made entities, right? And anytime humans get involved, we have a tendency to make things really good, and sometimes we have a tendency to make mistakes. The problem with persistence is there becomes a cliff that at some point you're going, as an employee, give up and either move on or get out of the marketplace, or worse yet, stay at the organization and just become de-engaged, which is the opposite of engaged. That will more frequently occur when you have supervisors that aren't building those relationships, that's not building employee engagement, um, and that's where employees don't feel like their organization is looking out for their best interest.
So they become de-engaged. The relationship has devolved. They're not moving forward, and they become de-engaged. Can that be turned around, or is that an individual decision they have to invest, or is it both parties coming together?
Well, that's a good question. Again, the tricky point of that is what drives motivation. Um, so most authors and researchers and leaders would say motivation is often driven by the individual. So I used to be a high school basketball coach, and we would have this discussion a lot. Like, how do we get students to be motivated to excel on the basketball court? And really, what we found in that scenario was we, as coaches, try to give every possible um, tool that the student or the athlete needed to be motivated. Praise, constructive criticism, a vision of where we're going, collaboration, but ultimately led down to the employee. And we see that, it's interesting, we see that in the business environment too. So motivation will be driven by the individual, but I really believe leaders need to provide the tools so that the employee can make that decision to be motivated at the workplace. Like, come in on a Monday morning after a cup of coffee and be eager and ready to go, because you can see your supervisor, and your supervisor is going to have a smile on their face, and you know that what you're producing at your organization is doing the world good or doing your sector well, and you're going to go home at the end of the day and feel of worth, right? So to answer your question, it's with both, uh, but ultimately, both the leader and the employee has to make the choice to be motivated.
So the company and the leader, the manager, supervisor, they provide help to provide the environment, but the individual has to show up. If they're not willing to, because like you said, we provided coaching, feedback, we had a vision where we're going, we had collaboration. But if that individual basketball player doesn't want to engage and participate in the drills and the practices, then they're not going to play their best when it comes time for game time as well. How important is social um, social emotional awareness and emotional intelligence when it comes to leading, especially in regards to the next generation?
Yeah. So when we look at emotional intelligence and we look at social intelligence, it really comes down to like situational awareness. How do people perceive my actions, but also how do you perceive their actions? So when you talk about motivation, sometimes maybe you just didn't hire the right person for the job. Right? Something went negative in the hiring process, um, and you kind of want to take a look at that to say, what can we do better next time? Like, maybe we didn't provide a complete picture of what the job description is, so who we are as an organization, or maybe we didn't develop a model of what type of employee that we're actually looking for. But if you do develop that model and you do hire the right candidates, and then something goes away 3, 4, 5 years down the road, and what you saw as a very productive employee is now becoming a very unproductive employee or a de-engaged employee, you need to sit back and have a thoughtful discussion with that employee to say, as an employee, as a mentor, as a coach now, is saying, we noticed that it seems like you're struggling at work a little bit, or maybe not as content as you were previously. And then often what you find out is, in those types of cases, it's not a situation at work. It's most likely a situation at home that you might be able to have some support or provide support. Or if you find out that it's something at work, and maybe it's just been escalating over time, and then something's started off with something so small that you can get back and fix it. Because remember, if you use your emotional intelligence, if you use your social awareness, which relates back to social intelligence as well, um, you want to retain your good employees. And we do have ups and downs, and recognizing that you have a very good employee that has a down streak, take the time to build it. Because if you have that trust and relationship, you should be able to have that open discussion to say, what can I do to help fix this for you? And sometimes it comes down to the discussion that, well, maybe the organization isn't right for you, but what type of organization is right for you, and how can I help you to move into that spot that you really strive for? And that again goes back to servant leadership.
Totally. You mentioned the idea of having an open discussion. You brought up the idea of bringing the naysayers and people who are critical and are willing to share their thoughts and feelings. One of the issues that you addressed recently in an article that you had shared with me also from LinkedIn was about the role of HR and the issue of handling the polarizing factors that are out there. And because though they do exist and we live in a polarized world, any quick tips or suggestions on whether or not it is more productive to bring those conversations into the fold in a corporation or to leave them at the door?
Yeah, so when we go back to employee engagement, we go back to trust, and that all leads to increased production. So if we go back to a simple theory of speed of trust, which is probably a book that a lot of us have read, when trust goes up, production goes up at the same time, right? So when we're looking at the discussion of polarized worlds, I believe that we need to have discussions within the workplace. And that should be easy to do if you've already established those relationships early on, where people can feel at home at work, where they can feel like they can constructively but critically talk about what they're feeling outside of work, but obviously in a constructive manner. I don't believe, I come from a leadership world where I don't believe that people just leave their stress at the door when they walk into the organization. Some do believe that, and some of that goes back to different leadership styles. I believe that if we can minimize some of that stress that they're feeling in the outside world, we'll probably be able to have more production inside my business, inside my organization. So how do we do that? One is give people a venue to talk. Allow people to have the opportunity, maybe like in a townhouse situation, where people could just talk about the topics that's occurring. If you think about today, what's occurring in our world, we have politics occurring. We have the national election that's coming up. We have the coronavirus and people becoming sick. We have the discussion that's going on with the Supreme Court. And then we have business sectors within our industries that are failing because of quarantines that are happening. So it's almost like we have a perfect storm that's aligning. And by giving the people the chance to talk and help inform each other, take the topic of racial tension. I live about 20 minutes north of Kenosha, Wisconsin, and a couple of weeks ago we had a shooting that occurred, a police shooting with an individual, and that sparked protest and destruction that occurred. And walking around even stores trying to buy stuff, I heard people talking very passionate about how they felt. And a lot of it was, we don't understand what's occurring and we don't understand what's happening. So I believe from an HR world, if you give the people the opportunity to talk and the time, you're going to be that much more productive on the backside, right? They're going to be able to come and speak with you. Training about different lenses that we may not be used to. The discussion that comes up though in this is, how much time do we give? Because time is money. And I try to make the arguments, and research will back this up, is if you take that time on the front end, you'll get your dividends on the back end of it. So I do believe of opening that door safely and constructively to have deep and powerful discussions, which should improve the feeling of safety and security for each employee.
I think a lot of what you just said really ties together a lot of the concepts you've shared so far. Servant leadership, open, honest communication, authenticity, creating a space for people's voices to be heard, establishing trust, all together in that space. The constraint I can see is time, and obviously you can't spend 8 hours of your 8 hour workday on that. But it sounds like a little bit of effort up front is gonna re-solidify. Hey, I get that you're acknowledging. You're saying, I know you're going through some stress. We're all going through some stress, and we're all in the same ship together, and we can still work together even if we have different opinions. Because I can't imagine you're going to solve the issues of racial inequality or the concerns around the Supreme Court justice or the national election like in that hour conversation or 30 minutes. It's not going to be solved, but at least it's going to be expressed.
Correct. And if you build upon it over time, right? It's maybe 30 minutes, 45 minutes here over um, Kringle or some sort of like sweet treat and coffee or healthy food, depending on what your employees want. Um, if you build upon it over time, then it's not a 6 hour day. It's not an 8 hour day you're working on these topics. It's you may be able to get them down to 10 or 15-minute days, right? Or maybe my other theory is if you start training people on how to have these discussions, they can take over some of these discussions on their own during breaks and during lunchtime or just after hours, right? They can do it constructively and recognize that everybody has their own opinions and recognize that it's not about the opinion that will help us become a better organization or the difference of opinions. Although I believe diversity is very important, it's about how we work together. It's how we trust each other. It's how we recognize that I need you so that I can be successful, and we need the next person so that the whole organization can be successful. And we can do that through a diverse field of lenses.
So giving your employees the tools, like you said, the people near where you live, they're saying like, I don't know what to make of it. I'm trying to understand it, and helping them have the tools to process and communicate more effectively. What are some tools in general that you think that the next generation of leaders are really going to need going forward in the world that is emerging right now?
Yeah, so it's the ability to transform. It's the ability to recognize what you may be learning in your MBA program may be sufficient for today, but recognizing that you got to stay on top of it. You got to recognize that as the Gen Z generation is starting to get in the workforce, there's a good chance you're going to be working with the generation that comes behind Gen Zs. And how are you positioned to do that? Which is why when we do a lot of one-on-one executive type coaching, we talk about the importance of coaching, the importance of mentorship of their staff, and the importance of being authentic. Because if you really want what's in the best interest of your employees, and you recognize that you may not have all the answers, that you're going to be able to transform in time. If you put down your coffee cup, as the old vision of the old manager, if you put down your coffee cup and say, "I know it all, kid, you're 19 years old, you just got out of college," which would be an awesome feat being 19 right out of college. But let's just say you just got right out of college. Sit back and learn. How's that new employee going to respond when we know that they want to be part of the conversation? So the new leaders that are going to be successful are going to find ways for all employees to be part of the discussion and recognize that their opinion should matter in coming up with a new design, coming up with a new process. And it's interesting when we go in and we meet with some businesses, we hear from some of the employees about what some of the struggles are. And sometimes it's innovation. And then it's even more amazing that 6, 8 months down the road, that company is struggling because now they haven't evolved and now they're just finding it out. But if they would have taken the time to just sit back and listen to their employees, um, it could keep them out of bankruptcy.
I think a lot of the tools that you shared can help with that to help avoid those uh, difficult scenarios from occurring, which goes all the way back to scenario planning and the what ifs and risk reduction and things like that. Communication, conversations are a huge part of leadership. Matt, can you tell us what is on a personal level? Can you think of a conversation that you may have had that had perhaps the most significant impact on your life, either personally or professionally?
It's very interesting that you ask that, and when I've been asked that question in the past, the first scenario always pops up, or the first discussion always pops up. When I was 18 years old, I had a mentor, and I just got into a public sector and position, and um, that supervisor asked me, he goes, "Where do you want to be in 20 years?" And I said, "I want to be a leader." And I just got out of 4-H. I was doing things on a state level and helping things on a national level that to help the organization grow, and I want to do that here. And his comment was, take the time to learn how to be an employee. Take the time to figure out what the employees want, because if you take the time to understand that, you're going to become a stronger leader at the end. And now that I look 20 years back, that was very insightful discussions, because had the opportunity to get involved with a union, which I didn't know much about a union at that time. Had the opportunity to hear concerns that were expressed from like a management employee's vision. So that now that I'm in the field that I am in, I could talk about both sides. I could talk about what it's like to be that employee that may not have had a college education at that point. And now I can communicate with CFOs and CEOs that may have graduated from Harvard, from my doctoral side and other experiences. So I think it's just taking that time to understand the other points, the other reference points, so that you can help them in the long run.
Fantastic. That's great advice. You got to learn how to follow before you can learn how to lead. That's amazing.
Right.
What is the best way for our listeners to get in touch with you, stay in touch with you, and find out more about what you're doing?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. So always open up for discussions. Feel free to get a hold of me on LinkedIn is a good way from connecting that way. Another way to get a hold of me is through our consulting service. We just opened up a new consulting business in June. It's called Morph Advisors. So we transitioned from Horizon to Morph Advisors just recently. And part of that is we are working with my co-founder is truly in the millennial range and experiences. And he brings a whole different insight to our consulting service. So that's www.morphadvisors.com. So that's why we call it Morph Advisors. Or you can get a hold of me at mhurtienne@morphadvisors.com.
Fantastic. Dr. Matt, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for your time. Take care, John.
Wonderful. And for all of you listening, thank you so much for being here and joining us on Key Conversations for Leaders. Until next time, develop yourself, empower others, and lead by example.